All right, so let's start the naval news segment here by talking about China's pursuit of nuclear and hypersonic weapons and how they're adding urgency to strategic command to improve our defense so that we can counter these. This is a piece on USNI News written by John Grady. John's been knocking it out of the park lately. He is a very good reporter, and he picks very interesting topics, and his take and my take have been the same or similar since we started doing this segment. From the piece, John writes, China's recent full speed ahead breakout in nuclear forces, space, and cyber efforts, hypersonic systems, adds new urgency to America's need to ensure its deterrent systems are holding, U.S. Strategic Command top officer said on Thursday. Admiral Charles Richards said the United States has never before faced a two-peer opponent with a, well, World War II we did. Oh, but they weren't peer opponents. Okay. With extensive nuclear weapon arsenals and high technology systems capable of operating across multiple domains. Okay. He put a lot of caveats onto that sentence, and he's right. In his Hudson Institute online forum discussion, which there's a link here if you guys want to go watch that, Richard concentrated on China's rapidly fielding a range of strategic weapons. He lists 6 new ballistic missile submarines, air-launched cruise missiles, an improved nuclear command and control system, delivery systems for different domains, upgrading the missile defense systems, and changing doctrine for the use of these systems is an example of the breakout. And he's absolutely right. He hit the nail on the head. China isn't just building more ships and planes and weapons. They're integrating those into a multi-domain command and control, which is really important to do. So they can use, all those different tools in a single battle. Everything from space to cyber. Those are the domains that don't get talked about much because they're some of the newest domains in the modern warfare. And they're building systems like this that will command and control all these together. So it's not just the numbers game with China. It's an actual capability here. There's a picture of Admiral Richard. I guess they were doing a talk here with Rebecca, a Hudson Institute fellow. Okay, so from his talk, he says, what I'm focused on is totality. That not only changes what the Chinese are capable of doing, but it builds new missile silo fields and launches ballistic missile submarines. But what is the next thing we're going to find? He said some silos could be a shell game to create doubt in analysis minds. And chat was absolutely right. The YouTube comments, whenever we talked about the fields of hundreds of new missile silos being built, one of the first things people jumped on was they're not going to have missiles in every one of those silos. It is a shell game. And they're just going to build a lot of them and say, all right, figure it out. Which one has a missile in it? Which one doesn't? Right? And so Stratcom has recognized that vulnerability as well. He says earlier the Kremlin developed and fielded an intermediate range nuclear cruise missiles that it claimed were not covered by the treaty because it was intermediate range. That's the key thing there. As a result, Washington withdrew from the intermediate range nuclear arms treaty under the Trump administration and began testing longer range cruise missiles. The fact is both Russia and China can go to any level of violence in a crisis, including using nuclear weapons and their uniquely destructive capability. Yep, that's what we said earlier here on the stream, is that if we go to war with China specifically, I don't think they'll have any qualms at all using nuclear weapons in a limited fashion, just to demonstrate that they're willing to go all the way without actually going all the way. When I say all the way, I mean melting the earth. Richard said, his command mission is to ensure the potential adversary does not act at all. Yeah, the best way to prevent that from happening is not to go to war in the first place. He added the United States hasn't done anything in the last 30 years in modernizing its nuclear forces before the Obama administration changed course on updating the triad. The policy continuing through the Trump administration is the center of the reviews of national defense strategy, nuclear posture, and missile defense the Biden administration is conducting. So it looks like they're continuing whatever changes the Obama administration began way back then are still going on today, which is good, but we need to improve our delivery methods, especially with that hypersonic capability. That is the new capability that China and Russia both claim to have. And China's demonstrated it, so we know that they have it. Richard said the review should lead to better definitions of who's responsible for what in the American command system. where I fit in the role as a whole mosaic of deterrence. That's a good point. So, we've got this triad, right, of air, sea, and land-based nuclear deterrence. And we have, a large number of people that are responsible for those weapons, and how those people work together in the chain of command is very important. Honestly, I thought we had all that figured out years ago, but maybe it's more complex than a simple chain of command. And that's what he's saying here in this piece, is that we need to make sure we know who's responsible for what. That's a very key word. The fact that we don't know that is a little concerning, All right, from the piece, he says strategic deterrence and nuclear deterrence are two different things. Okay. Credibility is a key component of both. That's true. Yeah. He says allies like Japan and South Korea, which he has met with recently, understand the United States' commitment to deterrence, including threats to North Korea. Wow. Talk about a Freudian slip there. Richard says Stratcom. I'll be hearing about that on YouTube comments, that's for sure. Richard says Stratcom has a requirement to provide the nation with conventional prompt strike. Yeah, that's the CPS. That's the Navy's hypersonic weapon, is a conventional prompt strike. And the word conventional is referring to its warhead. So we can get a hypersonic weapon on target and not engage in nuclear activity. And so that's really the next big thing. That's probably going to be our first working hypersonic missiles, what I think. He says the command is ready to receive on the first day a hypersonic conventional intercontinental weapon into any service. So just a bit of background there about how China's pursuing nuclear and hypersonic weapons. They are ahead of us. I think he admits that there, and that we just have like 20 years of catching up to do. And we're doing it. We're making progress, but we are not used to being behind the technological curve. We're usually on the edge of it, and we're trying to maintain our advantage. In this case, we're behind and we're trying to catch up because we don't have the advantage. We don't have these weapons yet in our arsenal. All right, let's take a minute to see what chat says here. Hypersonic has limitations. It's not a magic bullet. That's true. It sure is. It does have limitations. Death on High says the shell game considered in the 80s with Peacekeeper missiles. Yeah, because we had a lot of our own silos in the Midwest, right? The analysis was that it was a waste of time and money. Yeah, well, China doesn't seem to care about wasting time or money. They have tons of manpower, that's for sure. A hypersonic MOAB weapon. A hypersonic MOAB would be great. We'll see what they actually come up with. I know that the CPS is going to be a conventional weapon. So something like a 2,000-pound penetrator bomb going Mach 5 plus. That's pretty cool. And that's kind of the route we're going. I'm sure we're going to go nuclear with it as well. But having this capability in a conventional sense makes it much more usable. Because you just can't use a nuclear weapon. Once you do that, the game's up. You never know what the other side's going to do after you use the first nuke. All right. Let's talk about lessons learned from the Ricard fire spreading throughout the fleet. So if you guys don't know this, LHD-6 burnt down last year at the pier as it was coming out of a long refit, 2-year refit period. And they ended up having to scrap the ship. This huge marine carrying, helicopter carrying, vertical plane carrying ship, almost the size of an aircraft carrier. It's like a small aircraft carrier, burnt down. They burnt the inside of it, stem to stern. It was just gone. And so now we're going to take those lessons learned from that fire and apply them to the fleet. That's what this is about, written by Miss Mallory Shelbourne. And here you can see a picture of Damage Control Assistant Second Class Morales, front and center there on the San Antonio class amphibious transport dock ship USS Arlington, is training sailors assigned to San Antonio amphibious ship USS Fort Lauderdale. Okay, so the sailors from the Fort Lauderdale came over and are doing training on this ship here. All right, so from the piece, she says, aboard littoral combat ship USS Kansas City off the coast of California, the Navy has made several adjustments in its practices aboard surface ships and at shipyards in the wake of the fire that gutted an amphibious warship last year. The ship has placed a renewed focus on fire safety and altered how it checks surface ships to ensure that they're ready to fight fires. After the former USS Mahome Ricard LHD-6 burned for several days last year at Naval Base San Diego in a fire that damaged the ship so badly it had to be scrapped. So what changes did they make? I mean, that's really what we want to get to. So let's talk about how submarines have been protected by the crews in shipyards for years. And that's, we always have people on board, even whenever it's in the dry dock and it's ripped apart. There's always somebody back there and maneuvering, watching the reactor and all that stuff. Even though it's all shut down, you still have a physical presence there. And then in the forward end of the submarine, and keep in mind, submarine's obviously a lot smaller than these ships, right? But we have at least one watchstander on board 24/7, even as it's practically gutted of any kind of equipment, and it's just a shell of itself, because you're still watching and taking temperature readings, making sure that the bilges aren't freezing or whatever. There's always something to check on board a submarine, whether it's forward or aft. So we always have people on board checking every space constantly. Yep. And then, yeah, on top of that, you have a topside watch looking at the outside of it too. So let's see what they're doing. What changes are they making in the surface fleet? It says, Senior Chief Petty Officer David Hofkuss says they started beefing up a lot of the requirements. One of the big things that I know that they're changed to is the requirements for roves, which is basically a roving the ship and basically making sure everything is good to go. Before, it was kind of left up to the engineering duty officer and a fire marshal, which sounds like a civilian position, to ensure that there was no fire on board the ship. So he says now, and this is directly from Naval Surface Forces Pacific, in other words, like the Admiral. He says you have an engineering duty officer, the fire marshal, so the same two guys responsible for roving the ship, the command duty officer, and the section leader all have to rove as well. They all have to rove 3 times a day, and they can't do it all together, which would make sense. You want to stagger it out. He says they have to rove through all the engineering spaces, and they're focused on firefighting equipment, making sure the ship is able and capable of conducting or combating and defending the ship in the event of a damage control incident. Yeah, because that's exactly what happened. Is the saboteur on the LHD-6 spent time sabotaging the 4 fire hoses that were closest to where the fire began. That's one of the reasons why it that they couldn't fight it right away, is whenever they went to their initial response to get the CO2 extinguishers and flake out the fire hoses had been damaged, cut, in one case completely removed, and nobody noticed that. The reason why nobody noticed it is they didn't have these roving watches on these larger surface ships when they're in these dry dock periods. Now they do. They have multiple people responsible for doing the roves 3 times a day. I think that's a great change. I'm surprised it wasn't like that before, but at least that's the way it is now, so that's good. He says, so it's like every 2 hours, there's somebody that's going up and roving and making sure, and that this addition is internal over time. Yeah, so every 2 hours, somebody's roving the ship. And there's a picture of what was going on last summer. This is before the fire really got out of control, because all this radar stuff here, all this stuff melted. This mass got so hot, it fell over on itself. Yeah, it was a complete mess. And the thing that's disgusting is that this ship spent 2 years in a workup period. So all the internals, all the electronics, all the encryption was state of the art. It was brand new, super expensive, billions of dollars lost by whoever started this fire. That case is going through the courts right now. So we'll see whenever that's done, who was responsible for this fire. So continuing with the piece, says there's a lot of additional requirements for when you go into the yards. There's briefings that have to be conducted by entities that are actually conducting the yard period. So say, for instance, if you're running services through a door, there's a requirement for running them through the door. You have to have quick disconnects labeled, and they have to be labeled quick disconnects. Yeah, that's the same as it is on submarines too. You never foul a hatch. You never do that. But sometimes in the shipyard, you can't avoid it. So if you do, you need to be able to disconnect whatever services are going through whatever hatch, so you can shut that door in an emergency if you need to. So I think that was already in place. That shouldn't be a new change. Yeah. And look at that, he's doing fire hose training. Oh, he looks sad. He said he's having to do fire hose training now. Oh, and look at this guy. He has no idea what he's doing. Ooh. I'm just joking. But I'm glad they're getting some hands-on training. See, from the piece, he says, we got to make sure that these sailors are ready on day 1. And how do you best do that? You train them before they arrive at the ship. And now they're already getting firefighting training from Recruit Training Command Great Lakes. That's great, but we want to give them more. That's true. The firefighting training at Great Lakes, whenever I went in, it was a long time ago. It was 1 day. We expended a CO2 extinguisher into a barrel that they had set on fire. And then the other half of that was we had to get dressed up in the FFEs, those really hot fire suits, and get on a hose or be a hose man or a nozzle man or something, and put out a small fire? I don't even think we did. No, we just had to spray. We had to go through the different spray patterns because you had solid stream, and then you had wide angle, and you had narrow angle fog. And that was it. They're like, good luck. Go off to your submarine or go off to your ship. But once for submarines, after boot camp, you have to go to sub school, and there's a lot more fire training there. I think we had a whole week in the fire trainer at sub school. I assume the surface community did not have that additional training before they got on board the ship. And that is a real problem that they need to address. And it sounds like that they have. So I'm glad to see the Navy's taking actual actions. You know, they're actually doing something. They're changing not just the culture, but they're increasing their roving watches and their firefighting training. Really good response to this. All right, let's see what you guys say about this. It says, hey guys, now USMC fire watch duties are to check the fire extinguisher suppression gear. Yeah, part of being a fire watch is also making sure that the bottle's full, right? One of the things that the saboteur did was he discharged a lot of the CO2 extinguishers that were near where the fire started. And I don't know how anybody didn't hear that, because discharging a CO2 extinguisher is loud. It makes a lot of noise. So he apparently did that at a time when nobody was on board or nobody was around. Yeah. Let's see. Minister says USS Guitaro sank pierside partially because of a fouled hatch, I believe. Yeah, all these lessons learned are learned in blood or flood. And in that case, it's probably flood. Black says, this stuff implemented all seems basic procedural security. Yeah, you would think they would have already be doing this, right? But sometimes, I mean, apparently in the case of the roving watches, they clearly were not doing that. So that is a huge change. All right, let's move on to the next one.